What is going on, Team Tactile? Today I want to talk about a smaller form factor comparison between two keyboards that if you're looking for that 65-ish% layout, you should be considering. On the bottom we have the KBD67 Lite R4. On the top here we have the Bakeneko65 by Canon Keys. They are both fantastic keyboards and both should be considered if you are looking for the 65% layout for your work life. So let's start real quick with what you get from them that's super similar, and we can point out some of the differences. So they're both going to come with a carrying case. KBD fans here, Canon Keys here. No problems with either of the quality there. KBD fans case is a little slimmer. So if you are on the go carrying this with you, maybe that's going to be something that stands out for you. But also, you know, if you want more protection, the Canon Keys one is a little more robust. Other than that, the construction of these is very different. So the way that the Canon Keys one works is this gasket mount here. So you're actually going to put all the switches in, and you can see, if I do a good job here, this purple gasket that goes around, and then there's all these little feet around the keyboard as well that this sits on, and you just kind of nestle this in. It does make it, I'd say, slightly more challenging when you are trying to switch things out. So if you're somebody who's going to be playing around with this a lot, this is a little less traditional, whereas this is more traditional. You can see you have all your screws in the back there. Construction of them is different as well. The Bakeneko comes in aluminum. I believe they have a couple of different options there though. The KBD fans is a plastic ABS case, which I thought I was not going to be a huge fan of, but this is a fantastic keyboard, so don't let that fool you. And I don't know if I pointed out in the back here too, you get a silicone weight in the bottom, no foam or anything like you will on the KBD67, but you know, the sound profile is definitely dramatically different based on just the construction. And we'll do a sound test using the same switches as well, just so we can see that. Get your stabilizers for both of these that you'll have to lube yourself, please do that. And otherwise, the big difference is, for some reason, it drives me crazy that I mention it, maybe in some videos, is that Canon Keys just hates including USB cables. So even though you get your USB port, you won't get a USB cable on this. So you'll have to have your own. KBD67 thankfully comes with your USB-C cable, so you can plug this thing right in. You may have multiple sitting around, you may not. It is a nice thing, especially because the Bakeneko65 is going to be a little more expensive to begin with because it's aluminum. They both come in various numbers of colors, although I think the KBD67 is getting to be a little more difficult to get your hands on at the time of filming this, whereas the Bakeneko65 is readily available and I think continuing to be manufactured. You can get different weight types. The silicone that I showed is probably what you're going to end up with though. And they have tons of finishes, tons of colors, anything under the sun really at this point. I'm looking at a long list of everything they got there. So let's take a look at how putting these together goes and the differences there. All right, so as far as construction goes, we're going to start with the Bakeneko65 again, because this is, I think, one of the reasons why this one may stand out to people is if you have multiple keyboards and you're looking for something that you haven't done, because maybe you're used to the more traditional kind of sandwich style, I'll say, keyboard construction. So this is definitely a little bit of a different one. It's really cool, and once you learn how to build it, it's not a huge deal at all. But you can see that there is this gasket that goes around. The switches are just popping right in. There's nothing really holding that together. Again, this is where a switch fork would come in handy if you got to mind that you have a gap here so that you can fit that gasket on. But other than that, it's really simple. Again, the only thing is if you're looking to pop out the switches and pop new ones in, because you can see this is hot swap, you are going to basically be starting from scratch, because once you pull all of the switches out, that gap is no longer there. You're just left with your plate, which I believe is an FR4 plate, and your PCB, and you kind of have to make that gap. So if you are building this keyboard, definitely start around the edges, keep pulling these up. Once the edges are set, the center doesn't really move after that. Or again, there are tools that they make for this, like a switch fork, just to keep the gap there. But once you learn how to do it, it's not a huge deal, and it is a pretty satisfying build. So obviously after you have everything together, you just wrap this gasket around it, around the whole thing, and you are done. outside of connecting our port here. Plug that in. You can see you have a channel where the cables are supposed to go, debatable if they're going to go there. And then again, there's all these little kind of feet that are just going to hold up the PCB. So you just really push down until that's in there. So you slide it in, across the little knob, push it down, and it will just settle where it needs to be. So right now, again, the switches don't matter. I do have the baby kangaroos in here so that we can do a sound test comparison on both these keyboards with the same switches so we can see what the difference is. But overall, that is the construction of this keyboard. All right, so switching over to the KBD67, this is going to be a more traditionally kind of put together keyboard. So you'll have your 8 screws on the back, and you'll be left with a number of things, which is always nice because you'll have your PCB and everything. So you get your top pieces, all this silicone that you can see here. Those are little pads that they give you because everything's about increasing the dampening on this. And then you can pull this out and see that it's kind of the full gasket. And you get some nice foam in here as well. You can see this is a pretty standard kind of gasket mounted that you have here. I do like that everything's contained within this. So obviously when you're pulling out the Bakeneko, you have the wires everywhere. But for this one, you get a nice piece of case foam that you can lay on the bottom there. You know, because you can see how it's cut out. You get some additional dampening, and then you have your PCB here as well. So again, you get RGB out of this one, which is nice. A little more, I'd say, simple to clip your switches in. Still hot swap, but you would be going through potentially a longer process with this, although you can pop them out and in without pulling the whole thing apart if you're feeling risky and don't want to support the back of your PCB while you're putting your switches in. Otherwise, there's really not a ton to say about it. Again, this is a fantastic keyboard, but it is just more normal. I do think this comes in at about $40 cheaper or so. I believe the Bakeneko65 is in the $150 mark, so maybe like $30, because I believe you can get these for about $120. But again, at the time of filming this, these are a little harder to come by than a Bakeneko, which is actively in production. But you get everything you need out of it. And this is really a fantastic keyboard. And if it's something that you're familiar with building or it's your first, it's a great deal as well. But let me pop in the same switches that we have in the Bakeneko, those baby kangaroos, and that way we can see how the sound is different. So we've gone through both of these keyboards, we've looked at the construction of them, done sound tests with basically the same switches, keycaps, and everything. And overall, my thoughts on this is they're both actually really good keyboards. I do think you tend to get a little bit more of a muted sound just from the gasket on the Bakeneko65. So having this around and then just kind of it sitting in really nice and tight, I think does a lot for the sound. To the point where I'm actually probably more satisfied with the sound on the Bakeneko65 than I am on the KBD67. And that's really surprising for me personally because I love the KBD67. I actually had different switches in the Bakeneko65 for a long time and I was not super happy with it. But with these baby kangaroos, I actually do think that the sound's a little better out of the Bakeneko65 over the KBD67. It's just a little louder, a little, higher pitched, I think, coming out of the plastic KBD67. Overall, they are both fantastic keyboards. It's going to come down to, if you want aluminum, Bakeneko65. If you want RGB, you're going to have to go KBD67. If you're looking to save a little money, KBD67 is probably better. If you don't have a USB-C cable, KBD67 is definitely better. If you are tired of the old way of building a keyboard, the Bakeneko65 might stand out. If you buy hot swap because you enjoy swapping things though all the time, I still think you're going to have an easier time with the KBD67 because you're going to be doing this every time. I will say the switches pop in and out much easier on something like this, but it is a little bit more annoying because when you don't have, you know, the foam or something sandwiched in between there just to keep the spacing consistent throughout, it can be a little annoying. Again, once you learn it, it's pretty easy. So I think they're both really good keyboards, and they both excel at completely different areas. So for the weight, for the sound, I actually do think that the Bakeneko65 might be the better choice. For the budget and for your more traditional build and something that's actually just a really enjoyable build, I think the KBD67 takes the cake there. Otherwise, what you're getting is very similar. Again, they're hot swap PCBs. They both come with carrying cases. The form factors basically the same. Even the heights of these, even though they look possibly a little off, they're actually very, very similar. They take up the same amount of space. So will you make a bad decision with either one of these? Absolutely not. But depending on your preference and availability, you know, that could definitely play into it, and your color choice as well, because right now you're going to get a lot more available for the Bakeneko65 than you would for the KBD67. But there's a reason why KBD fans is a name you hear about time and time again when you get into keyboards. It's a fantastic product. I really do love it. But actually making this video made me really appreciate the Bakeneko65. So like I said, you're not going to make a bad choice going with either of these. I think it's just going to come down to case material and how much like dampening and stuff you want out of the sound. But otherwise, they're both fantastic keyboards at a great form factor, and honestly at both a reasonable price considering how much keyboards can cost these days. So that's going to do it for another video here at Tactile Talk. Appreciate you guys tuning in, and I will see you all in the next one.